Those of you who know First Cobalt already know that our strategy from the time we started our company 2.5 years ago, in response, of course, to the EV movement, it was centered around North America and primarily North America mining assets. And as Casper articulated, we are going through a period of oversupply in mine feed, and particularly cobalt hydroxide. And so in this period, and it's a matter of time before that gets absorbed, demand supply will take care of itself. But during that period, we've shifted our focus to a refining asset that we have, go to the downstream and be a facilitator to absorb some of that surplus feed. And when the market does improve, we'll get back to our mining assets. And so I want to talk to you only about that today and not about our mining assets. And so here's the problem that we have. And we heard from Helena earlier today about partnerships offshore. America does have a lot of mining assets onshore. Permitting remains a big challenge in America. We are right now effectively 100% reliant on imports of cobalt sulfate for our energy needs on the continent. And most of that production, as we know, is coming out of the DRC. A lot of those assets are controlled by China, and most of that production, they're producing a cathode and processing a hydroxide. Most of that finds its way into China. And we're at a point now where China controls or will control about 80% of that market. And so the President of the United States declared cobalt to be a critical mineral. We're hearing a lot of good, encouraging words out of DC, but what do we do about it? And taking a mine to production, a discovery to production, 10 years plus, we've got a solution, I think, that can reduce our reliance on China fairly immediately while we work on making America maybe a little bit more mining friendly to the future. And so here we are. The answer starts in Canada, and it really came to the fore when we made a strategic decision to partner with the world's largest cobalt miner to help get us there. And so our solution, here it is laid out in 4.5 steps. Partner with the world's largest cobalt miner, take some of that DRC feed that right now is being produced in the DRC, and rather than have it all go to China, let's bring some over to North America. Let's recommission a refinery that's already built, already permitted, and has an operating history. And then lastly, let's produce cobalt sulfate for the US market out of Canada, 5 hours from the border, and bring it into the US market. And all the while, let's work on the regulatory environment to make it easier to bring all the resources that we have in America into production. That's a whole separate discussion. So here is an overview of who we are, of our asset base. Starting on the far right, the Cobalt Camp is where we got our start. We control half of 100 historic high-grade nickel and silver cobalt assets. Canada's oldest hard rock mining camps, in 1904 until the mid 1900s. Very high grade, lots of work still to be done there. We also acquired a more advanced asset, former Noranda asset called Iron Creek in what's called the Idaho Cobalt Belt. Outside of Morocco, the only place in the world you're going to find primary cobalt deposits on the planet. I would argue there's at least a dozen prospective targets there that warrant a lot more work, but that's the domain of juniors, and that requires better markets in order to move those forward. And then our flagship asset is the cobalt refinery. So here we are. We're going to focus a little bit on that, and let me just move forward and show you a picture. And I want to pause here and have a look at this picture. And First Cobalt today, and for the next 12 months, 24 months, we're not a miner, we're a refiner. We're focused on processing. We're focused on cash flow that is achievable in as early as 12 months from now. You've got a building here. It's built, it's permitted. You've got the infrastructure. You can see the power lines, the roads, the tailing facility. There's no concrete to pour. We've got to get feed in there. We've got to recommission the flow sheet. We're looking at a significant expansion within the 4 walls, in fact, 8 walls of this building. And so we're not going to suffer the challenges of a typical mine startup. It starts with geology. Is your mine plan right? Are you going to reconcile to your model? We're getting consistent high-grade feed out of Glencore. Secondly, permits. We've got our permits. We'll need amendments for the expansion, but we're effectively ready to go. We could recommission this in about 6 months' time with the current flow sheet. And lastly, the big risk when you try to build a new mine is the CapEx. We've seen blow-ups in our industry. I started at Barrick. I've worked at Sherritt. I've worked in a lot of producers, junior mining more recently, and nothing hurts me more than to see one of my peers blow up because of a CapEx challenge. We don't have that issue. There is no significant CapEx here. All the money we're going to be spending is on detailed engineering and modifying the flow sheet from within the building. And so here's a picture of the inside of the building. This is a hydrometallurgical facility. So environmentally, not a lot of challenges here. You're basically taking a powdered product, a hydroxide. You don't need any grinding media. You're putting it into solution. You're leaching it, filtration, separation, and you got your final product there. I'll go into a little bit of the specifications there, but I'd point out the replacement value of the facility alone is twice our market cap today, which just speaks to where the market sits and some of the challenges a lot of us are going through. So if you look at specifically, here's the timeline specifically on just the refining piece of our story. It starts with Some cobalt hydroxide we got our hands on in the DRC. This wasn't from Glencore, but from a third party. We tested it, and on a first pass produced a high-quality battery-grade product. And then we signed an MOU with Glencore while we were completing a scoping study. And that led to the conclusion of a strategic framework agreement that is pushed us into a feasibility study that we're halfway through right now. We got some field work that Ausenco was leading, a 6-week program that we got it done in 4. Refinery is meeting expectations, exceeding in some aspects, electrical in particular. And so we're into costing and some of the met work. We're kind of halfway through that now. And the prize here is to file a feasibility study in Q1 of next year. Hopefully within 6 months of that, we can see our way to first production on the existing flow sheet at 12 tons a day, yielding about 1,000 tons of cobalt units or 5,000 tons per annum of a cobalt sulfate product. And then a major expansion to 55 tons within a year of that, which would yield about 25,000 tons per annum of cobalt sulfate, all destined to the US market effectively, and maybe some in Canada. And so to revisit the steps, there's the first sulfate that we produced in a lab environment, just replicating our flow sheet. So it's battery grade, it's high purity, and I point out that the numbers there, even though it's battery and high purity, this was just a single process batch test that we did. We weren't targeting a particular battery specification. That's what we're doing right now. We're collecting specifications from North American and German auto companies so that we can target our met work accordingly. But this was a first pass, and it just gave us the encouragement that, yeah, this flow sheet that we've got is ideally suited to treat a hydroxide feedstock. In fact, it's even better than the North American feeds because we don't have to deal with the arsenic problem, which is prevalent in just about every North American deposit. So it debottlenecks our plant by getting rid of an autoclave. And the grades, instead of processing 7-8% concentrates, we're getting material that's 30% and already in a powdered form. And so then the scoping study that we came up with that really got us on the map, here are the projections, a capex of, call it $40 million with the contingency. We're trying to validate that right now with a feasibility study that's in hand. And the building, the aerial view, the bigger structure here is the refinery. Next to that is an empty warehouse, used to be a mill. And so as we look to expand our flow sheet from 12 to 55 tons, we're going to use the two buildings. And so our instructions to Ausenco is we don't want to pour concrete. There's lots of room to expand on the land package, but let's get ourselves operating the easiest way we can. And so the constraint was the physical limitations of the building. And here's what it would look like, assuming 55 tons a day and we achieve our projections of about 5,000 tons per annum. This is a Bloomberg NEF projection that the refinery would represent about 5% of global refining capacity of all cobalt. This would be alloy as well as the sulfate. Obviously much larger with the sulfate only. And when you look at who the big players are, no surprise, it's mostly Chinese entities, and there's little to none in North America. We do have the only permitted primary cobalt refinery in the continent. And it would be hard, frankly, for anybody to catch up. So our idea is let's try to get there with a big partner, a sponsor. We'll grow up, and we'll see how much bigger we can get it from there once we've worked at the flow sheet and got the cash flow going. And so what's the relationship? So the two questions, I suppose, for investors that I get all the time is, okay, what's the feasibility study going to stay? And I point them back to the scoping study and expect that we'll come in line with that. But then what's the commercial arrangement look like? And of course, we'll need the final numbers of the feasibility study before I can say that. But Glencore and First Cobalt, the arrangement we have for the first 4 to 5 years of our existence is they'll provide all the feed. They'll backstop some or all of the capex. We may try to bring in a third party, and then they'll market the product. And so they are leading the discussions right now with EV producers. So we're effectively a toller out of the gate, but it's a good way to get ourselves into cash flow without any equity dilution. So seems like a great opportunity for us. And then thereafter, we'll see how whether we face the market directly or continue on some other kind of tolling relationship. So again, the investor question is, what do the economics look like? And let me come to that. Actually, it's on the next slide. I flip the image around. You're looking now at the entrance to the refinery. You see the road going out to a paved road. You can see the town of Cobalt on the left, Lake Temiskaming on the right-hand side. So power, water, infrastructure, it's all there. That field is our property. We're actually looking at the left-hand corner of that field for dry stacking of our tails. The nature of the product is amenable to maybe going away from wet tailings impoundment areas to a dry stack, which environmentally would be great. And the sustainability mandate is prevalent in our work. Solar panels on the roof, and we'll need a charging station for my EV that I recently acquired. Economics, let's talk about it from a facility level, absent a commercial contract. If you were to overlay the scoping study numbers that I presented earlier with the current commercial arrangements that we see as between the DRC, there's a payability factor on the cobalt. So on average, we could say, depending on the prevailing cobalt price, 70% payability to the DRC miner for hydroxide sold into China, which means 30% of the gross metal value gets captured by the refinery. And that's what I've shown here. At a $20 cobalt price and 5,000 tons per annum, there's about $66 million of margin at the asset level that Glencore and First Cobalt are trying to capture. Of that, our OPEX projected on a scoping study level is about $26 million, so $40 million per annum of EBITDA. And so that's the starting point. And where it nets out, I'd ask for your patience, and we'll see where what we can announce and when we can announce it once we have the feasibility study done. And so that's it. I'm going to allow us to catch up a little bit. It's a pretty short, easy story. I think we're fairly uniquely positioned. I want to get this into production. And so from an investor standpoint, it's near-term cash flow. It's obviously an EV play. And then I haven't even talked about the exploration assets, but we've got great upside. And if we can accomplish this, what we've effectively done is we de-risked all of the other assets on the continent. This can be the go-to facility to process material from all of the other cobalt mines that are trying to be developed on the continent. It can also help on the recycling. This black sand material from the recycling would be perfect feedstock for this refinery as well. But baby steps, we'll get ourselves out of the gate, and if all goes well, we should be producing within 12 months from now. Thank you for your time.